Thank you, Andreas, for that introduction, and thank you to the organizers for enabling my colleagues and me to present part of our research here in this venue. And can we switch to my presentation, please? Thank you. Yes, I will be giving a short presentation on the topic of engaging in meaningful science stakeholder dialogues in polar and marine research on behalf of my colleagues and myself. Like Andreas mentioned, we work at the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven, Germany. And it is part of the Helmholtz Association, which is active in this varied array of fields. And the RV is especially active in the Earth and Environment field, where all the projects we looked at on a case study basis are based in this Earth and Environment field. Let me first go into a little bit of why we are looking at how to best achieve impact. There's a very easy way to look at this, and this is the 4A approach. The first A is the accountability. So as a policymaker, you are accountable to your constituents to show where the money is going and what research is funded and what the return on investment for society is. The advocacy on behalf of the individual researcher or on behalf of research institutes to show what good work they're doing, what their impacts are, and to show here we are doing this good work, give us more funding to pursue this opportunity further. Analysis on behalf of the funding institutes to see what research programs are working and giving good returns on their investment, and to see what avenues to pursue further. And the last A is simple allocation, who gets what research funding, when, at what part. And to get a bit into the meat of our work, I chose a very controversial piece here that is highly debated between the fundamental scientists, the social scientists, and the scientists doing a bit of applied work. And this colleague is proposing that science right now is in a crisis and trying to find a way. You see the little scientists there tumbling around, aimless, and he is postulating that science isn't self-correcting, it's self-destructing, in fact. And to save this enterprise of science, scientists must come out of the lab and into the real world. And that's where we choose to look at this last little part, come out into the real world. How do these science stakeholder dialogues take place at our research institute? So we looked at research projects funded by the European Union in our research institute and looked at projects that explicitly wanted to address stakeholders outside of their academic field, and narrowed it down to a certain set of 7 research projects, and then postulated this hypothesis that in fact meaningful stakeholder engagement calls for dialogic communication processes, and investigated this on a case study basis, looking at 7 projects. And to do this, we talked to the project officers on each project working at the RV and did a semi-guided interview with all 7 of them to see how they talk to the stakeholders. So we first tried to reach a common nomenclature on, for example, the term stakeholder, because it's often thrown around, but very little researchers actually define what their stakeholders are and who they want to address with their research. Then to get to the meat of the interview, we asked questions about their prior experience in communicating the research to stakeholders, and questions about how the project was set up and how the stakeholders were integrated into the project and into the actual research process, as well as how the interaction with the stakeholder was actually taking place inside of the project. Sorry. And then at the end of the interview, we asked them what the results were of the dialogue that was conducted with the researchers. Afterwards, we asked them to self-reflect a bit on the topics we talked about and asked them to draw a few lessons that they learned from their whole experience communicating with the stakeholders, so we could combine them all together in the end in our little conclusion that we come to. So within the 7 research projects, we identified 3 distinct dialogic approaches towards this dialogue with the stakeholders. And the first one is a simple one-directional information transfer, where the scientists basically just works to create results and then dumps them in a form, or in a manner of speaking, onto the stakeholders in a one-size-fits-all approach, So the scientist deems this information necessary for the stakeholder and just transfers it in a very one-directional form, in the form of project reports, for example, or simple newsletters or project websites. So there's no feedback loop going on here, and the scientist doesn't really engage with the stakeholder. And also engagement is here often thrown around, but often just means outreach activities and not really engagement. Then the next model is still a one-directional model, but a targeted information transfer. And here the scientist still decides what the needs of the specific stakeholders are, and segments the stakeholder into groups and subgroups based on these needs that he identified before, and custom tailors the information products towards each stakeholder. But as you see, there's still a lack of feedback. It's still one-directional. The arrows are just going in one direction. But this is remedied in the third model we identified, which is in fact a targeted information exchange again. But you see there's a feedback loop at the end. So also stakeholders are incorporated into the research projects in a certain amount of the cases. So the stakeholders, have a direct input on the research objective and are given influence in the research project, so to say a stake in the research to create a certain sense of relevance for them. And based on their inputs, the information that is transferred is actually tailored to their individual needs. And this has been rated as very, it's very positive for the whole project process and also the impact in the end. Based on these three dialogue models, we try to incorporate as many of the pros as possible and take out as many of the cons as possible, and came up with this fourth model to follow when you want to have a promising science-stakeholder interaction. And we like to call this the dialogic approach to science-stakeholder interactions. And in this model, the science and the stakeholders are treated as equal partners from the very beginning of the project. So even the research questions are formulated in conjunction with stakeholders and scientists. And the continuous dialogue is taking place to continuously co-produce knowledge that gets taken up by the stakeholder immediately inside the research project and from the custom-tailored results. And again, we have a feedback loop, like we heard in the last talk, to see what kind of these dialogue approaches worked and what didn't, of course. So, to come to a conclusion for our project, I had to limit myself to 3 little points. So first I'd like to say that the term stakeholder, like I mentioned in the beginning, is often thrown around because also the EU is calling ever more for more stakeholder integration, more direct addressing of stakeholders, but very little projects clearly define who is their stakeholder. So they don't tell you who is their key stakeholder, they don't custom tailor information to them, and most important, they don't speak to their key stakeholder before they have projects to share. Secondly, engagement is often taken to equal outreach or dissemination activities, but in fact it's not a synonym of those words. Engagement, by definition, entails a strong connection and commitment also between the scientists and the stakeholders. Thirdly, the dialogue between the scientists and the stakeholders was rated most beneficial by the scientists when the stakeholders were active partners in the research process. So we tried to include that in our 4th research project. But, and there's a big but coming, all these 4 models that are presented here have their merits, but they highly depend on the context and the content and the goals of the project. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. This is only applicable to projects that want to co-create knowledge with the stakeholders. So there's still a certain freedom for fundamental sciences as well as other projects that are a bit more blue skies, so to say. And I want to end on this little sentence, and hopefully I can get out at one breath and leave you with that. So keep in mind, societal relevance and impact are not achieved by ever broader dissemination of results, but rather by opening up traditional academic structures to allow non-academic stakeholders to become equal partners in a research project and therewith to promote meaningful outcomes while not losing touch with simple scientific curiosity. And on this mouthful, I want to leave you, and I hope I'm not over the time. Thank you.